The scream tore through the winter air before Harrigan Whitlock even registered what he was seeing. His horse's hooves crunching through the crusted snow along the creek bank as a woman's arms flailed desperately in the churning water where the ice had given way beneath her. Without thought, without hesitation, he threw himself from the saddle and plunged into the freezing water that bit into his skin like 1,000 knives, his strong arms reaching for her even as the cold tried to drag them both under into darkness. The woman's eyes were wide with terror, her lips already turning blue as she struggled against the current that pulled at her heavy skirts. Harrigan kicked hard against the creek bottom, his boots finding purchase on the rocky bed as he wrapped one arm around her waist and hauled her against his chest. She was small, delicate, and shaking so violently he could feel it through his thick coat. The creek was not deep, but the current was stronger than he had anticipated, and the cold was a living thing that wanted to claim them both. "I have got you," he shouted over the rush of water, his voice rough and commanding. "Hold on to me." Her fingers dug into his shoulders with surprising strength, and he pushed toward the bank, his legs burning with the effort of moving through the icy water. Each step felt like an eternity, but finally his boots found the muddy edge and he hauled them both up onto the snowy ground, collapsing beside her as they both gasped for air. His lungs felt like they were on fire despite the cold that had already seeped into his bones. The woman was coughing violently, water streaming from her mouth as she curled onto her side. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins and hung in wet ropes around her face. Harrigan forced himself to his feet, his movements clumsy with cold, and scooped her up without asking permission. His horse, a steady buckskin gelding named Buck, had waited nearby, and Harrigan managed to get them both into the saddle, settling the woman in front of him as he wrapped his coat around her shaking body. "There is a town not far," he said through chattering teeth. "Chloride, Arizona. We need to get warm, or we'll both freeze to death out here." She nodded weakly against his chest, unable to speak. Harrigan urged Buck into a careful trot, mindful of the ice and snow that covered the trail. The January cold of 1885 was unforgiving in this part of Arizona territory, up in the mountains where winter still held sway, even though the desert valleys below rarely saw such weather. He had been heading south from the silver mines when he had heard her scream, and now he thanked whatever providence had led him along this particular path. The ride to Chloride took 20 minutes that felt like hours. By the time the scattered buildings of the mining town came into view, Harrigan could barely feel his hands on the reins. The woman in his arms had stopped shaking, which worried him more than the trembling had. He made straight for the boarding house at the edge of town, a sturdy 2-story building run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, who had a reputation for discretion and kindness. He half fell from the saddle, catching the woman before she could tumble to the ground, and kicked at the door with his boot. "Mrs. Patterson, open up! Medical emergency!" The door flew open to reveal a plump woman in her 50s with flour dusted on her apron. Her eyes widened at the sight of them both soaking wet and blue with cold. "Sweet mercy, get inside now!" Harrigan stumbled through the door, and Mrs. Patterson immediately took charge. "Put her in the front room by the fire. I will get blankets and hot water. You need to get those wet clothes off both of you before pneumonia sets in." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Mrs. Patterson enlisted the help of her daughter, a capable young woman named Sarah, to tend to the stranger, while Harrigan stripped out of his frozen clothes in another room and wrapped himself in wool blankets. His fingers and toes burned as feeling slowly returned to them, and he sat as close to the fire as he could manage, drinking the hot coffee that Mrs. Patterson pressed into his hands. "The young lady is asking for you," Sarah said, appearing in the doorway with a curious expression. "She wants to thank her rescuer." Harrigan stood, still wrapped in blankets since his clothes were hanging by the fire to dry. He moved to the front room where the woman sat propped up in a chair, also wrapped in blankets, her long dark hair spread over her shoulders as it dried. In the firelight, he could see her face clearly for the first time. She was beautiful, with delicate features and large hazel eyes that watched him with an intensity that made his breath catch. "You saved my life," she said, her voice still hoarse from the cold water she had swallowed. "I do not even know your name." "Harrigan Whitlock," he said, moving closer, "though most folks call me Harris." "And you are?" "Eleanor Zimmerman," she replied, a faint smile touching her lips, "though most folks call me Ellie. I owe you everything, Mr. Whitlock. If you had not come along when you did, I would be dead at the bottom of that creek." "What were you doing out there alone?" he asked, settling into a chair across from her. "That is dangerous country, especially in winter." Ellie's expression clouded. "I was running away. My father wanted me to marry a man in Prescott, a businessman twice my age who already buried 2 wives. I could not do it. I took what little money I had saved and left before dawn, heading for the mining camps. I heard there was work for seamstresses and cooks, and I thought I could make my own way. But I got lost in the mountains, and when I tried to cross the creek, the ice broke beneath me." Harrigan studied her face, seeing the determination there beneath the lingering fear. "That took courage. Not many women would strike out on their own like that." "Or foolishness," Ellie said with a bitter laugh. "I nearly got myself killed. If you had not been there, my father would have gotten his wish anyway. I would have been gone, just in a different way." "You are alive," Harrigan said firmly. "That is what matters. And you are in chloride now. There is work here if you want it. Mrs. Patterson might even have room for you to stay on if you're willing to help around the boarding house." Mrs. Patterson, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped into the room. "I could use another pair of hands. That is true enough. Winter is hard on folks up here, and I've been turning away boarders because I cannot keep up with all the work. If you are handy with cooking and cleaning, Miss Zimmerman, I would be pleased to offer you room and board plus a small wage." Ellie's eyes filled with tears. "You would do that for me? You do not even know me." "I know you are a young woman in trouble who needs help," Mrs. Patterson said kindly, "and I know Mr. Whitlock risked his life to save you. That speaks to both your luck and his character. You are welcome here as long as you need." Ellie looked between them, her expression filled with gratitude and something else that Harrigan could not quite name. "Thank you, both of you. I will work hard, I promise." Over the following days, as they both recovered from their ordeal, Harrigan found himself drawn back to the boarding house again and again. At first, he told himself it was simply to check on Ellie's health, to make sure she had truly recovered from her near drowning. But as the days turned into a week, and then 2, he had to admit the truth. He was falling for Eleanor Zimmerman. It was in the way she smiled when she saw him, the light that came into her eyes. It was in the sound of her laugh when he told stories about his years working cattle drives and mining claims across the Arizona territory. It was in the gentle touch of her hand when she poured his coffee in the morning, the brush of her fingers against his that sent warmth spreading through his chest. Harrigan was 26 years old and had never let himself get attached to anyone. The life of a cowboy and prospector was too uncertain, too dangerous for a wife and family, but Ellie made him want things he had never allowed himself to dream about. She made him want a home, a future, something more than the next job and the next town. One evening in early February, as the worst of the winter cold began to ease, Harrigan asked Ellie to take a walk with him. They bundled up in coats and scarves and walked through the quiet streets of Chloride, their breath misting in the cold air. The town was small, just a few hundred people who had come for the silver and stayed for reasons of their own. Above them, the stars blazed in the clear mountain sky. "I have been thinking," Harrigan said, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, "about what comes next. For me, I mean." Ellie glanced at him, her face half shadowed in the darkness. "Will you be moving on soon? The weather is improving. I imagine a man like you does not stay in one place for long." "A man like me," Harrigan repeated, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "What kind of man do you think I am, Ellie?" She was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think you are a good man, kind and brave, but also restless, someone who needs open spaces and freedom, not the kind of man who settles down easily. You are right about most of that, Harrigan admitted. I have never been one to stay put. But lately I have been thinking that maybe it is time for a change. Maybe I have found a reason to stop wandering. Ellie stopped walking, turning to face him. What reason is that? Harrigan met her eyes, seeing the hope and fear warring there. You? Ellie, I cannot stop thinking about you. From the moment I pulled you out of that creek, it has been like something inside me shifted. I know it has only been a few weeks, and I know you might not feel the same way, but I had to tell you the truth. I am falling in love with you. The words hung in the cold air between them. Ellie's eyes widened, and for a long moment she just stared at him. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face, so bright and genuine that it made Harrigan's heart race. I feel the same way, she whispered. I've been so afraid to say it, afraid that you would leave and I would be left behind. But Harris, I have never felt this way about anyone before. When I am with you, I feel safe and happy, and like maybe the future does not have to be something to fear. Harrigan reached for her hands, pulling her closer. Then stay with me. Not just here in Chloride, but wherever life takes us. Let us build something together, Ellie. A real life. A real future. Yes, Ellie breathed, and then she was in his arms, her face pressed against his chest as he held her tight. Yes, Harris, I want that more than anything. They stood there in the street, holding each other as the stars wheeled overhead, and Harrigan felt something he had never experienced before. He felt like he had come home. But their happiness was not without complications. 2 weeks after that night, a man rode into Chloride asking questions about a young woman who had run away from her family. His name was Clayton Archer, and he was a hired investigator working for Ellie's father. Mrs. Patterson came to warn them, her face worried. He is staying at the saloon and asking everyone if they have seen a girl matching Ellie's description, she said, wringing her hands. Says her father is desperate to find her and bring her home. What are you going to do? Ellie had gone pale, her hands shaking as she gripped the edge of the kitchen table. He will take me back. My father will force me to marry that man, and I will have no say in it. I cannot go back, Mrs. Patterson. I would rather die. No one is taking you anywhere, Harrigan said firmly. He had been sitting at the table cleaning his rifle, and now he set it aside and stood. You are a grown woman, Ellie, 20 years old and capable of making your own decisions. Your father has no legal right to force you into a marriage you do not want. You do not know my father, Ellie said, her voice tight with fear. He is a powerful man in Prescott. He has connections, friends in the territorial government. If he wants me back, he will find a way to make it happen. Harrigan moved to her side, taking her hands in his. Then we will not give him the chance. Ellie, marry me, right now, today. If you are my wife, your father will have no claim on you. You will be under my protection, and I swear to you, I will not let anyone take you away. Ellie stared at him, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. You want to marry me? So soon? I was going to ask you anyway, Harrigan said, a slight smile touching his mouth. Maybe in a few more weeks, with flowers and a proper proposal. But the truth is, I know my heart. I love you, Ellie. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. If we do this now, we can protect you and start our future together. What do you say? Tears spilled down Ellie's cheeks, but she was smiling. Yes. God help me, yes, Harris, I will marry you. Mrs. Patterson was already moving toward the door. I will fetch the minister. Reverend Holt is a good man, and he will understand the urgency. Sarah, you go find witnesses. We will do this proper and legal so there can be no question about it later. Within 2 hours, Harrigan and Ellie stood in the parlor of the boarding house, surrounded by Mrs. Patterson, her daughter Sarah, and 3 of the long-term boarders who served as witnesses. Reverend Holt, a kindly older man with wire-rimmed spectacles, led them through the simple ceremony. Harrigan had no ring to offer, but Mrs. Patterson produced one that had belonged to her late husband, pressing it into his hand with a watery smile. When Reverend Holt pronounced them man and wife, Harrigan kissed Ellie gently, feeling the rightness of it settle into his bones. She was his now, and he was hers, and nothing was going to tear them apart. The trouble came the next morning. Clayton Archer arrived at the boarding house with two men Harrigan did not recognize, both wearing badges that identified them as territorial marshals. Mrs. Patterson met them at the door, her arms crossed and her expression stern. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" she asked, her voice cold. Archer was a thin man with a weasel-like face and cold eyes. "We are looking for Eleanor Zimmerman. I've been informed she is staying here. Her father has hired me to bring her home, and these marshals are here to ensure the law is followed." "There is no Eleanor Zimmerman here," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "Only Mrs. Eleanor Whitlock, who is married and living with her husband." Archer's expression darkened. "Do not play games with me, woman. I know she is here. Step aside or I will have these marshals arrest you for obstruction." Harrigan appeared behind Mrs. Patterson, his rifle held loosely in his hands. He did not point it at anyone, but the threat was clear. "You heard Mrs. Patterson. My wife is under my protection now. You have no business here." One of the marshals, a broad-shouldered man with a thick mustache, held up a hand. "Let us all stay calm. Mr. Archer, is it true that the woman you are looking for is now married?" "So they claim," Archer said bitterly. "But I have my doubts about the legality of such a hasty union. Her father will want proof." "I have the marriage certificate right here," Reverend Holt said, emerging from inside the house with a document in his hand. "Signed and witness proper, registered with the territorial office as of yesterday evening. Mrs. Whitlock is legally married to Mr. Harrigan Whitlock. Her father has no claim on her." The marshal examined the certificate carefully, then handed it back to the Reverend. "It appears to be in order. Mr. Archer, I'm afraid there is nothing we can do here. The young lady is married, which means she is her husband's responsibility now, not her father's." "This is not over," Archer said, his voice low and angry. "Her father will not accept this. He has invested too much in the marriage arrangement he made. There will be consequences." "Let him try," Harrigan said, his voice steady and cold. "My wife and I are not interested in what her father wants. We are going to live our lives as we see fit. And if he has a problem with that, he can take it up with me directly. But I warn you, I am not a man who backs down easily." Archer stared at him for a long moment, then turned on his heel and stalked away, the marshals following behind him. Mrs. Patterson let out a long breath and sagged against the door frame. "That was close," she murmured. "Too close." Ellie appeared at Harrigan's side, slipping her hand into his. "Do you think he will really tell my father? Do you think there will be more trouble?" "Probably," Harrigan admitted. "But we are married now, Ellie. That gives us legal protection. Your father can bluster all he wants, but he cannot force you to leave me. We just need to be careful for a while until things settle down." But things did not settle down. Over the next few weeks, they heard reports that Ellie's father, a man named Marcus Zimmerman, who owned several businesses in Prescott, was making threats and spreading rumors. He claimed that Harrigan had kidnapped his daughter and forced her into marriage. He told anyone who would listen that he planned to have the marriage annulled and Harrigan arrested. It became clear that staying in Chloride was no longer safe. The town was too small, too isolated, and too vulnerable to the kind of pressure a man like Marcus Zimmerman could bring to bear. Harrigan and Ellie needed to go somewhere bigger, somewhere they could disappear into the crowds and build a life without constantly looking over their shoulders. They made the decision together one night, sitting by the fire in their small room at the boarding house. Ellie was curled against Harrigan's side, her head resting on his shoulder. "We should go to Tucson," Harrigan said quietly. "It is a good-sized town, growing fast with the railroad coming through. We can find work there, make a fresh start. And it is far enough from Prescott that your father will have a harder time causing trouble." Ellie was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "When do we leave?" "As soon as we can make the arrangements. A week, maybe less. I have some money saved up from my time working the mines, enough to get us started. And I can always find work as a ranch hand or a guard for the mining companies. We will make it work, Ellie, I promise you." She tilted her face up to his, her eyes shining in the firelight. I am not afraid as long as I am with you. You saved my life that day at the creek, Harris, and every day since you have given me reasons to be glad I am alive. I trust you completely." Harrigan kissed her then, pouring all his love and determination into the gesture. She responded with equal passion, her fingers threading through his hair as she pressed closer. They had not yet consummated their marriage, both of them aware of the thin walls of the boarding house and the need for discretion. But the desire was there, burning hot beneath the surface, a promise of what was to come when they finally had privacy and security. They left Chloride on a bright morning in late February, their belongings packed on a mule they had purchased with some of Harrigan's savings. Mrs. Patterson cried as she hugged them both goodbye, pressing a basket of food into Ellie's hands and extracting promises that they would write and let her know they were safe. "You are good people, both of you," she said, wiping her eyes with her apron. "You deserve happiness. Do not let anyone take that away from you." The journey to Tucson took 5 days of hard riding. They followed the main trails south, moving through the mountains and down into the high desert. The weather was warmer here, the sun bright and strong even in winter. They camped under the stars at night, and Harrigan taught Ellie how to shoot his pistol, wanting her to be able to defend herself if trouble came. On the third night, as they sat by their campfire, Ellie asked him about his life before they met. Harrigan had been reluctant to talk about his past, but he found himself opening up to her in ways he never had with anyone else. "My parents died when I was 12, he said, staring into the flames. "Cholera epidemic that swept through our town in Kansas. I had an older brother, but he died in the war, fighting for the Union. So it was just me, alone. I worked as a ranch hand for a while, then signed on with a cattle drive heading west. I was 16 and thought I knew everything. The trail boss nearly fired me a dozen times for being too cocky." Ellie smiled faintly. "I cannot imagine you being cocky." "Oh, I was," Harrigan assured her. "Young and stupid and convinced I was invincible. The West knocked that out of me pretty quick. I learned that survival means being smart, being careful, and knowing when to fight and when to walk away. I have done a lot of different jobs over the years: cowboy, miner, guard, scout. I've seen most of Arizona Territory and parts of New Mexico and California too, but I never felt like I had a reason to stop moving. Not until I met you." "What made you come to Chloride?" Ellie asked, leaning against his shoulder. "I heard there was work in the silver mines. I have never been afraid of hard labor, and mining pays better than cowboying most times. I was planning to work the winter season, save up some money, then head south before the heat got too bad. But then I found you in that creek, and all my plans changed." Ellie was quiet for a moment. "Do you ever regret it? Stopping your plans, marrying me so suddenly?" Harrigan turned to look at her, cupping her face in his hands. "Never. Not for 1 second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Ellie. I thank God every day that I was riding past that creek at exactly the right moment. I believe we were meant to find each other." Tears shone in her eyes, but she was smiling. "I believe that too. I was so scared, so sure I was going to die. And then you were there, pulling me out of the water, holding me. It was like an answer to a prayer I did not even know I was saying." They kissed then, long and slow, the firelight casting dancing shadows across their faces. When they finally pulled apart, Ellie rested her forehead against his. "I love you, Harris Whitlock, more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." "I love you too, Ellie. Always." They reached Tucson on a warm afternoon, riding into a town that was thriving and busy with activity. The railroad had indeed come through, and the town was full of people from all over, making it easy for 2 more newcomers to blend in. They found a small house to rent on the edge of town, a simple adobe structure with thick walls that would keep out both the heat of summer and the cold of winter. Harrigan found work quickly, hiring on as a guard for the stage line that ran between Tucson and the mining camps to the east. The pay was good, and the work, while sometimes dangerous, suited his skills. Ellie took in sewing and mending, her neat stitches and attention to detail quickly earning her a reputation among the town's wealthier residents. Together, they made enough to not just survive, but to slowly build a comfortable life. As spring turned to summer, they settled into a rhythm. Harrigan would be gone for days at a time, riding guard on the stages, then return home to find Ellie waiting for him with a warm meal and a warmer smile. They made love in their small house, learning each other's bodies with tenderness and passion, cementing the bond between them that had started the day he pulled her from the frozen creek. In June, Ellie told him she was pregnant. Harrigan had just returned from a run to Benson, tired and dusty from 3 days on the road. He found her in their small kitchen, her face glowing with a mixture of joy and nervousness. "Are you sure?" he asked, pulling her into his arms. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday," Ellie said, her voice trembling slightly. "I am 3 months along, he thinks. The baby should come in December, around Christmas time." Harrigan felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. He was going to be a father. He and Ellie were going to have a child together. It seemed impossible, miraculous, terrifying, and wonderful all at once. "This is the best news I've ever heard," he said, his voice rough with feeling. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You are going to be an amazing mother, Ellie." "And you will be an amazing father," she replied, laughing through her tears. "Our child is so lucky to have you." As Ellie's pregnancy progressed, Harrigan found himself changing in ways he had not anticipated. He became more cautious at work, more aware of the risks he took. He had someone depending on him now, a wife and soon a child who needed him to come home safe. He started setting aside more money, planning for the future in ways he never had before. They received a letter from Mrs. Patterson in August, full of news from Chloride and warm wishes for their growing family. She reported that Clayton Archer had returned to Prescott empty-handed, and that there had been no further attempts to locate Ellie. It seemed that Marcus Zimmerman had finally accepted that his daughter was truly gone, married, and beyond his reach. "Maybe we are finally free of him," Ellie said, reading the letter over breakfast. "Maybe we can stop looking over our shoulders." "Maybe," Harrigan agreed, though he remained cautious. Men like Marcus Zimmerman did not give up easily, and pride could drive people to do terrible things. But as the months passed with no further trouble, he allowed himself to hope that Ellie was right. Their son was born on December 20th, during a cold snap that brought rare frost to Tucson. The labor was long and difficult, and Harrigan spent hours pacing outside their bedroom door while the midwife and a neighbor woman attended to Ellie. When he finally heard the baby's cry, strong and lusty, he nearly collapsed with relief. The midwife opened the door, smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Whitlock, a big, healthy boy. And your wife did wonderfully. She is tired but well." Harrigan pushed past her into the room, finding Ellie propped up in bed with a tiny bundle in her arms. She looked exhausted, her hair damp with sweat and dark circles under her eyes, but she was smiling with such radiance that it took his breath away. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Harrigan approached slowly, almost afraid to disturb the moment. He looked down at the baby, taking in the tiny red face, the shock of dark hair, the impossibly small fingers that waved in the air. Something shifted in his chest, a feeling of love so powerful and immediate that it shook him to his core. "He is perfect," Harrigan whispered. "What should we name him?" Ellie looked up at him, her eyes soft. "I was thinking Henry Whitlock. What do you think?" "Henry," Harrigan repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Henry Whitlock. Welcome to the world, son." He sat on the edge of the bed, wrapping his arms around both Ellie and the baby, feeling like the luckiest man alive. They had been through so much in less than a year. Near death, threats, running, fear. But they had come through it all together, and now they had this beautiful new life to care for. The first months of Henry's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and exhausted days. Harrigan reduced his work schedule to be home more, taking shorter runs on the stage line so he could help Ellie with the baby. Henry was a demanding infant, colicky and fussy, but both his parents adored him anyway. By spring, the whole family had settled into a new rhythm. Henry was sleeping better, Ellie had recovered her strength, and Harrigan had been promoted to head guard on the stage line with better pay and more regular hours. They moved to a larger house, one with a proper yard where Henry could play when he got older. One evening in April, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset while Henry slept inside, Ellie turned to Harrigan with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about that day at the creek?" she asked, "about how different our lives would be if you had not come along when you did?" "All the time," Harrigan admitted. "I think about how close I came to riding a different trail that day. If I had left Chloride an hour earlier or later, if I had taken the main road instead of the creek trail, I never would have found you. You would have died, and I would have gone on with my life, never knowing what I had missed." Ellie reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I think fate brought us together. I think we were meant to find each other, no matter how impossible the odds. When I was drowning in that water, when I was sure I was going to die, I had this strange moment of clarity. I thought, this cannot be the end. There has to be more. And then you were there, pulling me out, saving me. You gave me more than just my life back, Harris. You gave me a reason to live it." Harrigan pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "You saved me too, you know. I was drifting before I met you, going through the motions, but never really living. You made me want to be better, to build something meaningful. Every good thing in my life now is because of you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to deep purple. Inside, Henry made a soft sound in his sleep, and both parents smiled. "We should have more," Ellie said suddenly. "More children, I mean. I want Henry to have siblings, brothers and sisters to grow up with. What do you think?" "I think that sounds perfect," Harrigan said, grinning. "How many are we talking about?" Ellie laughed. "I do not know. 3 or 4, maybe? Enough to make this house feel full and loud and busy." "Then that is what we will do," Harrigan agreed. "We will fill this house with children and love and laughter. We will build the family neither of us had growing up. And we will make sure our kids know every single day how loved they are." Their second child, a daughter they named Helen, was born in the fall of 1887. She was smaller than Henry had been, with her mother's delicate features and her father's dark eyes. Henry, now nearly 2 years old, was fascinated by his new sister, constantly wanting to touch her and help take care of her. 2 years later, they had another son, whom they named James. And 2 years after that, twin girls arrived, Emma and Alice. The house was indeed full and loud and busy, exactly as Ellie had wanted. Harrigan had to work harder to support their growing family, but he did so gladly, knowing that every hour of labor was for them. The years passed in a warm blur of childhood milestones and family memories. Henry grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and learning. Helen was adventurous and fearless, always getting into scrapes. James was quiet and gentle, with a gift for working with animals. Emma and Alice were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into twice as much mischief as any single child could manage. Through it all, Harrigan and Ellie's love for each other only deepened. They still stole moments alone when they could, sitting on their porch after the children were asleep, holding hands and talking about their days. They weathered the challenges of raising 5 children with humor and patience and an unshakable partnership. In 1895, when Henry was 10 years old and preparing to start at the new school in town, Ellie received a letter that changed everything. It was from a lawyer in Prescott informing her that her father had died of a heart attack. The letter went on to explain that Marcus Zimmerman had left his entire estate to Ellie, his only child, despite their estrangement. Ellie stared at the letter for a long time, her expression unreadable. Harrigan watched her carefully, waiting for her to speak. "He is really gone," she said finally. "After all these years of worrying about what he might do, he is just gone." "How do you feel about it?" Harrigan asked gently. Ellie set the letter down, shaking her head. "I do not know. Sad, maybe, that we never reconciled, but also relieved, and guilty for feeling relieved. He was my father, but he made my life so difficult. He tried to control me, to force me into a life I did not want. And now he is leaving me his money as if that makes up for everything. You do not have to accept it, Harrigan pointed out. If it will cause you pain, we can refuse the inheritance. No, Ellie said firmly. I will not refuse it. That money can give our children opportunities we could never afford otherwise. Better schools, maybe even college someday. We would be fools to turn it down out of pride. But I will never forget that the real gift my father gave me was pushing me to run away that day. If he had not tried to force me into that marriage, I never would have been at that creek. I never would have met you. The inheritance transformed their lives. They paid off their house, put money aside for their children's education, and Harrigan was finally able to reduce his work schedule. He took a job as a deputy sheriff, something he had always wanted to do but had never felt financially secure enough to pursue. The work was safer than guarding stages, and it allowed him to be home every night with his family. As the children grew, Harrigan and Ellie made sure to tell them the story of how they met. They did not hide the difficult parts, the danger and the fear and the running away. They wanted their children to understand that love was not always easy, that sometimes it required courage and sacrifice and fighting for what you believed in. Henry grew up to become a teacher, following in his love of learning. Helen married a rancher and moved to New Mexico, where she raised horses and 4 children of her own. James took over the small ranch that Harrigan and Ellie bought outside Tucson, turning it into a successful cattle operation. Emma became a nurse, dedicating her life to helping others. And Alice surprised everyone by becoming a lawyer, one of the first women to practice law in Arizona territory. Through all of it, Harrigan and Ellie remained the steady center of their family. They watched their children grow and have children of their own, becoming grandparents and then great-grandparents. They celebrated every triumph and weathered every setback together, their bond as strong in old age as it had been in youth. On their 30th wedding anniversary, in February of 1915, their children threw them a party. The house was full of people. 3 generations of Whitlocks gathered to celebrate the couple who had started it all. Harrigan, now 56 with gray in his hair and lines around his eyes, stood up to make a speech. 30 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite his age, I was riding along a frozen creek in the mountains near Chloride, Arizona. I heard a scream, and when I looked, I saw a woman drowning in the icy water. I did not think about it. I just jumped in and pulled her out. It was the best decision I ever made. Everyone laughed, and Ellie, sitting beside him with silver streaks in her dark hair and laugh lines around her eyes, smiled up at him with the same love she had shown that first day. I have thought a lot over the years about fate and chance, Harrigan continued, about how many things had to go exactly right for Ellie and me to find each other. If I had taken a different trail, if she had crossed the creek in a different spot, if the ice had not broken at that exact moment. But I have come to believe that some things are meant to be. Ellie and I were meant to find each other. We were meant to build this life together, this family. And I thank God every day that I was in the right place at the right time to save her life, because in doing so, she saved mine. The room erupted in applause and tears. Their children and grandchildren crowded around, hugging them both and telling them how much they loved them. Harrigan held Ellie close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling the rightness of her in his arms. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and they were alone again, they sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The Arizona night was warm and clear, stars blazing overhead. Do you have any regrets? Ellie asked softly. Is there anything you would change if you could? Harrigan thought about it seriously, then shook his head. Not one thing. Every choice I made, every path I took led me to you. And that makes it all worthwhile. Ellie leaned her head on his shoulder, just as she had done for 30 years. I was drowning that day, drowning in more ways than one, drowning in expectations and fear and a life I did not want. And you pulled me out of all of it. You gave me freedom and love and a life beyond my wildest dreams. We gave that to each other, Harrigan corrected gently. That is what love is, Ellie. Saving each other every single day in big ways and small. They sat together in the warm darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful that would last long after they were gone. Their children would tell the story to their children, and on through the generations, the story of the cowboy who jumped into a frozen creek to save a drowning woman, and how that single moment of courage and compassion had created a legacy of love that would never fade. As they finally went inside for the night, Harrigan took one last look at the stars. He thought about that cold day in January of 1885, about the scream that had changed everything, about the decision to stop and help instead of riding on. It had been the easiest and hardest choice of his life, and he would make it again in a heartbeat. Because some loves are worth drowning for, and some loves are worth everything it takes to stay afloat. The years continued to pass with the gentle rhythm of a life well lived. Harrigan and Ellie remained inseparable, their love deepening with each passing season. In 1920, as the world changed around them with automobiles replacing horses and telephones connecting distant towns, they celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary quietly at home with just their children. Harrigan was 61 now, his body showing the wear of hard years working as a cowboy and lawman. His joints ached in the mornings, and he moved more slowly than he once had. But his eyes still lit up when Ellie entered the room, and his hand still reached for hers whenever they sat together. Ellie, at 55, had aged gracefully. Her hair was completely silver now, worn in a soft bun at the nape of her neck. Her hands were marked with age spots and the calluses of decades of hard work, but they were still gentle when she touched her husband's face. One autumn evening, as they sat watching the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of orange and purple, Ellie said, "Do you remember what you told me that first night we met, after you pulled me from the creek?" "I said a lot of things that night," Harrigan replied with a smile. "Which part are you thinking of?" "You said we needed to get warm or we would both freeze to death. You were so calm, so sure of what to do. I was terrified and half frozen, but your voice made me feel safe. I knew right then that I could trust you with my life." Harrigan squeezed her hand. "And you have trusted me with it every day since? That is a responsibility I have never taken lightly, Ellie. Being the person you depend on, the person you chose to build a life with, it is the greatest honor of my life." They watched as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deeper shades of red and purple. Around them, the desert came alive with the sounds of evening, crickets chirping and the distant call of a coyote. "I want you to know something," Ellie said, her voice soft but firm. "If I could go back to that day, knowing everything that would happen, all the struggles and fears and difficult times, I would still choose to cross that creek. I would still end up in that water because it brought me to you. Every single moment of our life together has been worth it." Harrigan felt his throat tighten with emotion. Even after all these years, she could still move him to tears with her words. "I would still jump in after you every single time. In any life, in any world, I would always choose to save you. Because you are the best part of me, Ellie. You always have been." They kissed then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 35 years of love and partnership and unwavering devotion. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling through their tears. Their family continued to grow. Henry had 3 children who were now having children of their own, making Harrigan and Ellie great-grandparents several times over. Helen's ranch in New Mexico was thriving, and she visited every summer with her family. James had married a wonderful woman named Catherine, and together they had expanded the ranch to include both cattle and horses. Emma had devoted her life to nursing and had saved countless lives during the influenza epidemic of 1918. And Alice, their fierce youngest daughter, was making a name for herself as a lawyer who fought for women's rights and fair treatment under the law. Every Sunday, as many of the family as could make it gathered at Harrigan and Ellie's house for dinner. The table would be crowded with children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all talking and laughing and sharing stories. Harrigan would sit at the head of the table, Ellie at his right hand, and feel a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was what they had built together. This loud, loving, chaotic family that sprang from a single moment of courage on a frozen creek bank in 1885. Every person at this table existed because he had heard Ellie scream and chosen to act. The weight of that responsibility, the magnitude of that single choice, sometimes overwhelmed him. In the spring of 1922, Harrigan's health began to fail. The doctor diagnosed him with a weak heart, telling him he needed to rest and take things easy. Harrigan nodded and agreed, but both he and Ellie knew what it meant. His time was running out. He faced it with the same calm courage he had shown that day at the creek. He made sure all his affairs were in order, that Ellie would be taken care of, that their children knew how much he loved them, and he spent every moment he could with his wife, holding her hand and remembering their life together. On a warm June evening, surrounded by his family, Harrigan Whitlock died peacefully in his sleep. He was 63 years old and had lived a full, rich life. Ellie held his hand until the end, whispering words of love and gratitude into his ear. The funeral was large, attended by people from all over Arizona who had known Harrigan or been touched by his life in some way. Former colleagues from his days as a deputy sheriff, ranchers he had worked with, families whose children he had helped. They all came to pay their respects to a good man who had lived with integrity and love. Ellie stood at the graveside, dry-eyed and composed, accepting condolences from the long line of mourners. But that night, alone in their house that felt too empty and too quiet, she finally let herself weep. She cried for the man she had loved for 37 years, for the future they would not share, for the grandchildren he would not meet, and the moments he would miss. But even in her grief, Ellie felt grateful. She had been given a gift that many people never received, a love that was true and deep and lasting. She had been loved completely by a good man who had chosen her every single day of their marriage, and she had loved him just as fiercely in return. She lived for another 12 years, long enough to see Arizona become a state, to see automobiles become common, to see the world change in ways she never could have imagined. She watched her children and grandchildren flourish, saw Alice argue a case before the state Supreme Court, attended James's 50th birthday party at the ranch, held her first great-great-grandchild in her arms, and every day she thought about Harrigan, she would sit on their porch in the evening and imagine him beside her, his hand in hers, watching the sunset together. She would tell him about her day, about the family, about all the things he was missing. And sometimes in the quiet moments, she could almost feel him there with her, his presence a warm comfort that never quite faded. Eleanor Whitlock died peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1934, at the age of 69. Her children found her in her bed, a gentle smile on her face, as if she had been greeting a welcome visitor in her dreams. They laid her to rest beside Harrigan under a simple headstone that read, "Together Forever." At the funeral, now elderly Henry stood up to speak about his parents. His own hair was gray now, his children grown with children of their own, but his voice was strong and clear as he told the story one more time. "My father once told me that he was just a cowboy riding past a creek when he heard someone drowning," Henry said to the gathered family. "He said he did not think about it, he just acted. He jumped in and pulled my mother out of the water. And that single moment of courage and compassion created all of this," he gestured to the crowd. Dozens of people spanning 4 generations, all connected by blood and love to the couple now resting side by side. But what my father did not understand, not until much later, was that my mother saved him too. She gave him a reason to stop wandering, a home to come back to, a love worth living for. They saved each other every single day in ways big and small, and they taught all of us what real love looks like. It is not just passion and romance, though they had plenty of that. Real love is choosing someone every single day, through good times and bad. It is building a life together, one moment at a time. It is jumping into freezing water without hesitation, because someone you love needs you. The family gathered at the graveside. 3 generations of Whitlocks united in their grief and their gratitude for the 2 people who had started it all. They told stories and shared memories, laughing through their tears as they remembered Harrigan's quiet strength and Ellie's fierce determination. As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the family finally began to disperse, but Helen, now in her 40s with gray streaking her dark hair, stayed behind with her siblings. The 5 of them stood together at their parents' grave, holding hands just as they had been taught to do when they were children. They were extraordinary, were they not? Emma said softly, her nurse's practical nature unable to hide the emotion in her voice. They were just people, Alice replied, her lawyer's precision coming through even now. People who made a choice to love each other and stick with it no matter what came. That is what makes them extraordinary. Not that they never struggled, but that they struggled together. James, the quietest of the siblings, spoke up. I was thinking about what Henry said, about them saving each other. I think that is what marriage is supposed to be. Not one person rescuing the other, but both of them choosing to be each other's safe harbor. Father jumped in that creek to save Mother, but she gave him a reason to keep living. They completed each other. Henry nodded, his eyes on the headstone. We should all be so lucky to find someone who would jump into freezing water for us and to be someone who makes another person glad they did. Helen, the adventurous one, smiled through her tears. They left us quite a legacy. All of us and our children and their children. We are all here because Father heard Mother scream that day and chose to help. Every child, every grandchild, every great-grandchild exists because of that single moment of courage. The siblings stood together in the fading light, bound by blood and love and the legacy of 2 people who had chosen each other against all odds. They thought about the frozen creek in Chloride, Arizona, about the young woman drowning and the cowboy who jumped in to save her. They thought about how that single moment had rippled out through time, creating waves of love and life that would continue long after they were all gone. As full darkness fell, and the stars began to emerge in the vast Arizona sky, the Whitlock children finally left their parents' grave. They went back to their own lives, their own families, their own loves. But they carried with them the lessons their parents had taught them through word and deed. That love is worth fighting for. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. That a life well lived is measured not in wealth or fame, but in the people you love and who love you in return. And that sometimes the most important thing you can do is jump into freezing water without hesitation because someone needs saving. The story of Harrigan and Eleanor Whitlock was passed down through the generations. Great-grandchildren told it to their children, and they told it to theirs. It became a family legend, the founding myth of the Whitlock clan. Some details changed over the years, the way stories do, but the essential truth remained. A cowboy riding past a frozen creek, a woman drowning in the icy water, a split-second decision to help. And from that single moment of courage and compassion, a love that spanned decades and created a legacy that would never die. In the small family cemetery outside Tucson, 2 headstones stand side by side, weathered now by decades of sun and wind and rain. Harrigan Whitlock and Eleanor Whitlock, born years apart but united forever in death as they had been in life. Visitors still come sometimes, descendants making pilgrimages to see where it all began. They stand before the graves and tell the story again, keeping it alive for one more generation. And if you listen carefully on certain evenings when the wind is right and the desert is quiet, you might hear the echo of a woman's scream and the splash of water as a cowboy jumps in without hesitation, and the sound of 2 hearts beginning to beat as one, a rhythm that would sustain them through 37 years of marriage and into eternity beyond, because some loves are written in the stars, and some loves begin with a scream and a splash and a hand reaching through freezing water to pull someone to safety. And those loves, the ones forged in moments of crisis and sealed with courage, are the ones that last forever. The Whitlock family thrived in Arizona through the 20th century and beyond, spreading across the state and into neighboring territories, each generation carrying forward the values their ancestors had embodied. They became teachers and ranchers and lawyers and nurses and soldiers and artists, but all of them knew the story. All of them understood where they came from. And on February evenings, when the winter cold crept into the Arizona desert and the sky turned the color of slate, members of the Whitlock family would sometimes pause in whatever they were doing and think about that day in 1885. They would think about courage and love and the power of a single choice to change everything. They would think about Harrigan and Ellie, young and terrified and brave, building a life together from nothing but love and determination. And they would feel grateful for the legacy they had been given, the proof that true love was real and worth fighting for. The story never ended, not really. It lived on in every Whitlock child born, in every marriage celebrated, in every moment of courage when someone chose love over fear. It lived on in the land itself, in the creek near Chloride where ice still formed in winter, in the house in Tucson where a cowboy and his wife raised 5 children and built a dynasty of love. And somewhere, beyond the veil of this world, 2 souls walked together through endless golden light, Harrigan's hand clasped in Ellie's, their love unbroken by death, their story continuing in realms beyond mortal understanding. They had promised to love each other forever, and they had kept that promise, in life and in death, in this world, and whatever came after, they were together. Just as they had been from the moment he pulled her from the frozen water and saw her face for the first time, just as they were always meant to be. 2 souls who found each other against impossible odds and built something that would last long after they were gone. A love that began with drowning and ended in eternity. A love that saved 2 people and blessed generations. A love that started with a scream and a splash and a cowboy who chose in that split second to be a hero. That was the legacy of Harrigan and Eleanor Whitlock. That was the gift they gave to everyone who came after, the knowledge that love is real, that courage matters, that the choices we make in moments of crisis can change everything, and that sometimes the most important thing we can ever do is jump into freezing water without hesitation, because someone we have not even met yet is drowning and needs us to save them, because in saving them we might just save ourselves too.